This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
The first 15 years of my career was in management consulting. So I go back to my boss and my boss's boss. And one of the things that they always used to comment when I would come up with an idea or thought was, "You're thinking like an engineer, not like a consultant." And I think what they meant by that was I'm not thinking broadly enough. And what it conditioned me to do was not think necessarily about what's needed today, but what's needed 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And when implementing technology in an organization, certainly in large organizations, it's very, very hard to implement technology. And it's very, very hard to change platforms, like an on-prem platform with a cloud platform. So if you don't think in terms of those broad terms, there's a greater tendency to miss pieces and parts. You've got to think with a longer term vision to make sure you're incorporating all of those different aspects.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Dr. Tim Calahan, CTO at Michigan Medicine. Great to have you on CXO Secrets.
Thanks so much for the invite, David. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
So share with us some background on Michigan Medicine and its position, if you like, in the broader University of Michigan universe.
Yeah, so Michigan Medicine is attached to the University of Michigan. It's really comprised of the medical school as well as the healthcare system that is attached to the University of Michigan. We also own or have purchased two other, what we call affiliates, two other healthcare systems with UMH West, which is on the western side of the state, and Sparrow Health, which is more on the north central part of the state. And there's aspirations for continuing to extend the Michigan Medicine brand and footprint in terms of our ability to deliver care really throughout the state. So when you look at it, with those specific entities and with some of the expansion goals that the organization has, it's really one of the larger academic medical centers in the U.S. And it's really pretty unique in terms of we don't have a lot of competition in the region and the university within the state of Michigan. So it really does put us in a unique spot in terms of our ability to service the market and deliver exceptional care for the residents of the state of Michigan.
You mentioned a growing portfolio there. I want to come on to that. You picked up the CTO role there in 2022, just over 3 years ago as we record. And that was following a long spell at Dell Technologies. What did you take on there, Tim, when you joined up to the Michigan Medicine journey? And how has that changed since then?
Yeah, so I was the CTO at Dell VirtuStream. We had really created this concept or idea of delivering Epic in the cloud. And we focused on Epic in the cloud. Epic is an electronic health record, probably one of the major ones globally and certainly here in the U.S. And we settled on that because not a lot of their customers had gone to the cloud. But when we created that concept or vision, it was really to allow healthcare systems to exit the data center business. And our philosophy around that was healthcare systems are really built up and comprised, and their mission statement is really for patient care, not to run IT systems, not to build data centers. And a lot of the healthcare systems, in order to deliver the exceptional care that patients come to expect, are required or have been required to build out this infrastructure. So we wanted to be able to build that out. And so for the last 10 years, I was doing that at Dell. What was unique about Michigan Medicine is they really wanted to capitalize on that concept. So there was an executive mandate by Marshall Runge and Andrew Rosenberg and others within the executive cabinet that really wanted to modernize their IT infrastructure, and that meant moving to the public cloud. So that's what caused me to take the position, because had been moving Epic to the cloud for the last 10 years, but not much else. And Michigan Medicine wanted to move Epic to the cloud and everything else. And I was like, that's going to be a ton of fun. So, of course, I'm looking forward to that. And shortly after my arrival, there was the purchase or acquisition of the Sparrow healthcare system. So right now we're about ready to get started on all of these cloud initiatives that have been in the wings and we've been preparing and diligently working on. And we also, and which is a ton of work and is a mountain of work, but we also have the real institutional need of how do we integrate and consolidate and invite other healthcare systems into the growing ecosystem that we're creating? And how do we make that seamless and easy for those healthcare systems? So there's a lot of M&A activity that's happening within healthcare throughout the U.S. We're no different. And I think a lot of the work and effort that we're doing in the cloud will translate well to allow other healthcare systems to come into our ecosystem and participate much quicker and easier than maybe some of our past acquisitions have been.
You mentioned cloud there, and of course there are lots of benefits, particularly in a dynamic environment like the one in which you work, where there are acquisitions, mergers, and so on taking place. And there are lots of carrots and sticks that drive one towards the cloud. And today I want to talk about one of those drivers that when you and I spoke a few weeks ago was really interesting. And believe it or not, I've had the conversation a number of times over the last few weeks as well since we first spoke. One of the drivers, call it a carrot or a stick, is about virtualization platforms. Some of the infrastructure, the technologies that we've been building our systems on for the last 10, 15 years or so. There's a bit of a ticking time bomb at the moment, not to put it too sensitively, that lots of organizations are sitting on right now. What can you tell us about your position around things like VMware, for example?
Yeah, so again, my vision and passion for public cloud has been in place for a good 10 years. And some of the reasons for that is the dynamic nature of being able to allocate compute resources and storage resources really on demand, where the traditional way is you order something, you have to rack and stack it, and 6 to 9 months down the road, you can use it. That's already out of date by the time you put it in place. So the cloud just creates this platform and infrastructure that allows you to respond to the business so much quicker and easier than some of the traditional alternatives. And what I've noticed probably over the last 12 to 18 months is from the announcement that VMware was being sold to Broadcom and some of the resulting enterprise renewals that were happening from that, we started to hear some real horror stories, if you will, that those licensing renewals were going up 5, 6, 7, 800%. And for those of us who are in the healthcare space, we're largely standardized on VMware. And here at Michigan Medicine, we're no different than most other healthcare systems. I think we're probably in the 95% of our server infrastructure has been virtualized, and probably 90% of that infrastructure sits on VMware. So when we started to hear these stories of these licensing renewal fees going up to the magnitude that they were, what it really did for us, because we already had our cloud initiatives in place, and we were already planning on migrating to the cloud for all the other benefits that it provides. But what that VMware sale and the Broadcom purchase really did for us was it really adjusted our total cost of ownership and our ROI analysis. It really added some logs to the fire of if you don't move off the existing legacy platforms that you have within your data centers today, you're going to pay you're going to pay a lot more than what you have in the past. So for us at Michigan Medicine, our path was already set by our executive team that had a fantastic vision of modernizing our infrastructure and using public cloud to do that. And the Broadcom factor just strengthened our business case and our return on investment analysis around that. But other healthcare systems, as I've talked to other CIOs and CTOs throughout the country of very prominent healthcare organizations, they are struggling with this. What do we do with VMware? What do we do with Citrix? These are two legacy platform providers that are really important and really ingrained within the healthcare delivery ecosystem, and they're traditionally or historically have doubled or tripled licensing fees at each license renewal. And Broadcom is now taking on the position of sometimes it's 5, 6, 7x, and that's going to be unsustainable for healthcare and the margins and the financial headwinds that we have and find ourselves in. So it's a real problem that all healthcare organizations will have to tackle. We're tackling it with cloud. Other healthcare organizations will need to address it in some form or fashion.
Of course, we're not here to bash VMware, bash Broadcom, but obviously stating that there is a challenge there that healthcare providers and many other organizations are facing. It was a $61 billion with a B acquisition in November 2023. So there's a lot of scope, a lot of cost that needs to be recouped by VMware's new owners, Broadcom there. And you mentioned, the subscription model and the perpetual licensing. That is, it does have a sting in the tail for many. So a move is necessary for you. That's the choice you've taken. The cloud we've spoken about there, but which cloud? Talk to me about, what considerations you have for what you do to move away from one platform and into another that's going to serve your more strategic aims.
Yeah, so we, as a public institution at Michigan Medicine, we had to issue a series of RFPs and in preparation of going to the cloud. And one of those RFPs was really around selecting a public cloud provider of choice and a system integrator that could help and assist with that move. And we went through an exhaustive process with a lot of deliberation to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the various clouds. And although there's similarities across the three major public cloud providers, there are also strengths and weaknesses associated with each of the respective clouds. And there were a number of items that started to bubble up for us that kind of informed the path that we ultimately chose and have now started to go down. And we kind of looked at a variety of different things. One of them was, from a feature and functionality perspective, from an identity. I talked about some of the mergers and acquisitions and some of the need to be able to quickly tie into healthcare systems. And we're leveraging Active Directory and Entra in order to do that. And that's a Microsoft technology. And that's a pretty common methodology that a lot of healthcare systems use. So that was one thing that we are migrating toward and getting better and doing more features around. There was the end user computing. We're doing a lot with Azure Virtual Desktop. I mentioned, one of the legacy vendors that's increasing fees in that particular area as part of our academic medical center license. We have the ability to run virtual desktops at a very economical price compared to other offerings. So we looked at that. We looked at some of the data and analytics components that Epic, which is our electronic health record, is doing, and they're doing a lot of R&D development on Azure, and which informed some of our decisions. And we also looked at licensing and how that would differ between the two clouds. And again, because we're an academic medical center, the licensing that package that was kind of offered by Microsoft allows us to move those licenses to their cloud. But if we would have moved to another cloud, we would have had to pay for those licenses again. So there's an additional cost if you choose something other than Azure. And one of the other, real important factors for us was one of our 800-pound gorilla applications is Epic, and I mentioned that a couple of times. Yeah. The other 800-pound gorilla application in our environment is Sectra, which is our imaging application. Now, if you just take those two applications, Epic and Sectra, that's about 50% of our data center footprint. So those are super, super important applications in our ecosystem. And Sectra basically communicated to us that we could pick any cloud we wanted as long as it was named Azure. So we knew which cloud Sectra was going to go into. And we knew we were already using Entra from an identity perspective, and we had already standardized on that. We knew end-user computing. We were already standardized on Azure Virtual Desktop. We already knew the analytics and computing portion of Epic was already going to Azure. We knew Sectra was going to go to Azure. So licensing was more cost-effective in moving in the Azure direction than going someplace else. So obviously there was a gravitational pull with Microsoft, and there was a comfort factor with Microsoft. We just talked about Broadcom, and we talked about technology companies are bought and sold every day. And that's just a part of the nature of technology. And we were pretty sure Microsoft wasn't going to get bought and sold. They're a pretty big organization. So we felt very confident in the company. And they're already, an established partner of Michigan Medicine and have done great work for the University of Michigan and Michigan Medicine over a long period of time. So we felt super, super comfortable in the company and the ethics and the people and the collaboration that we've had with that organization. So it made the decision really, really easy at the end when you started to stack everything up and kind of list the pros and cons of the different clouds. That's the cloud we ultimately decided on, and we feel super, super confident in that decision.
And those partnerships are important. And of course, given the nature of the work that you're doing, the stability that you speak of there is crucial too. And on that theme, tell me about the operational challenges, the change management when migrating those critical systems, the two big gorillas that you've got there, as well as all of the other supporting systems as well. And I'm sure there's highly sensitive and, without wishing to overstate it, sort of life and death patient data on there as well. Talk to me about your change management of moving that from the systems as was to the cloud to be. How do you manage that safely?
Yeah, it's a great question. So from a Sectra perspective, moving Sectra to the cloud, that is a managed service that we're acquiring from Sectra. So Sectra is actually going to come in and help and assist with that migration and that move effort. And the software because we're an existing Sectra customer, the software that we use today will be the software that they're using tomorrow. It's equivalent. And that'll make that migration and the change management around that migration easier. So that's kind of the Sectra piece of the puzzle. When we look at Epic, my team has been migrating Epic to the cloud for the last 10 years. So there's a rigor and a methodology in terms of how you do that, how you plan for that, how you test for that. And we're very confident in that methodology and in the dozens of implementations we've done. We've delivered that in a way that users are coming in on Sunday, they're using Epic. We cut over on Monday, they're using the Epic in the cloud. They don't even know any difference. The only thing they may see is it performs better. So those two systems, which are the two most important systems and most important applications, we've got an awful lot of confidence around. On the non-Epic applications or non-Epic, non-Sectra applications, or what we're calling our general purpose applications, we got about 900 of those we need to move. So we've selected a system integrator that'll help with there's an industry term generally referred to as an application migration factory, where you set up a set of people, processes, and technology tools in order to assist with that migration effort. So there's a technology component that basically takes the existing on-prem environment and mirrors that to the cloud. So you've got equivalent systems that are operating both in the on-prem environment and in the cloud environment. And then there's a certain set of processes that you'll want your application teams to follow to be able to check and verify that the cloud instance is operating the same way that the on-prem instance does, so that you can then begin to plan for that cutover. And the cutover is seamless because you're going from a mirrored copy, essentially. You're going to that cloud environment, and it should be as seamless as that Epic or that Sectra movement to the cloud. So, and there's some right sizing that needs to take place, and there's some, making sure that that it's provisioned properly in the cloud. But that's all part of that migration factory kind of experience and methodology. So we're super confident that we've selected the right vendor to help us with that. We're super confident in the team. Our existing staff does an incredible job of managing and maintaining these applications today and making sure that they're highly reliable. And they know these applications so well because they've evolved with these applications, and our staff is a long-tenured staff. So they know, what it takes to make those applications work. And if it's not operating at 100%, they're quick to let us know. So we're very confident through that checklist process and that migration process that we'll be super successful in moving those applications to the cloud. And the net result of that is, we'll move 800 applications, we'll move Epic, we'll move Sectra, which is a mountain of work, but we should do a lot of that is in a very seamless way to the end user environment. And that'll be the real testament, to how well we did, is if we can deliver this with very little end user impact, very little impact to hospital operations. And as you mentioned earlier in the show about critical care and patient care and life and death, that's really what we're talking about. We want to make sure that these cutovers are seamless because there's nothing more important than our patients and who essentially are our customers.
And of course, as well as the applications cutting over, like you say, your end users, hopefully not noticing anything apart from perhaps some performance improvements there. There are benefits potentially in terms of security and resilience and all of that good stuff as well in the new environment. Tim, it all sounds really, really positive. It sounds as though you've got a great program, some great partners there as well, getting the right people involved. And while it might sound a little bit twee to ask this question of a healthcare institution, I feel as though I have to ask it. Where is the headache? What is the biggest headache that you've got there? Because it all does sound very, very straightforward from how you describe it, but I'm sure there's some little bugs in the cracks somewhere there.
Yeah, no, it's a great and insightful question. Probably the biggest headache is how you operate stuff in the cloud is different than how you operate stuff in an on-prem environment. And I kind of liken it to speaking a different language. If you're used to speaking English and all of a sudden you're in Mexico or Spain, your ability to communicate in English is compromised, and you're not going to be as efficient in communicating unless you learn that native language. And even though there's a lot of similarities in cloud to the on-prem environment, we still have things like compute, we still have things like storage, we still have things like network. But how you provision and configure those things is very different than how we provision and configure those things on-prem. And so we're doing a number of different things in order to address that. One of the things is, I mentioned we issued an RFP. I think I mentioned we issued an RFP for skills and training. So we're bringing a package in and a provider in order to assess where people are at from a cloud skills perspective, and then provide a recommended training path and program to get them better positions to be able to manage or deliver their job essentially in the cloud. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And that will help tremendously in terms of upskilling and reskilling our existing staff. And then the other thing that we're doing is we are doubling down on the concept of what we're calling infrastructure as code. So by delivering things in an infrastructure as code, because we're delivering that in a scripted way, it creates consistency in the cloud. So if you deliver a firewall via code, you're going to deliver that firewall the same way every time. If you have to deliver 100 of them, they're all going to look the same. And that has been a little bit of a learning curve for our existing staff who are used to configuring Cisco routers or configuring Windows servers or Linux servers. They're used to configuring that with the native tool set. But by delivering it via code, we get the consistency that we want and need. And we're using tools like Terraform and Ansible in order to deliver those types of packages. So not only can we deliver the infrastructure as code, but we can also then begin to install application packages and configurations in a way that is programmatic and consistent. So that cloud environment should be much more consistent and should be much more automated in terms of how we manage and maintain that via that code base. That's a very different way to manage and operate your environment. And certainly it's different than how we operate it in our on-prem environment. And the big chasm that we have to get over is we need to train, we need to upskill, we need to bring good partners and providers in that can guide us in that journey and can help and assist to make sure that we're setting things up in the right way. And we're doing all of those things. So it's now I'm beginning to kind of look back and see us begin to deploy a lot of these technologies and philosophies, and it's just fun to watch.
Yeah, that's great. And you're right. It's the processes, it's the technology, and as you finished off with there, it's also the people as well that really make all of that work. Actually, in a conversation I had with a vendor the other day, they tried to put data in, so it was people, processes, technology, and the data. So turning it into a four-legged stool, which sort of works. Anyway, Tim, fantastic to hear about that journey that you're going on there at Michigan Medicine. It sounds as though you've got so much of the right platform in place there that will enable you to get that migration nice and smoothly without too many sticking plasters, but also as a platform for growth as Michigan Medicine grows its own presence as well. Thank you very much indeed. Before you go, though, some quick fire questions that we ask to all of our guests on the show, if that's all right. This show is called CXO Secrets. So, Tim, what is your secret? If you were to put your modesty to one side for a moment, tell us what key attribute you believe may have enabled you to achieve what you have.
Yeah, so I kind of go back. The first 15 years of my career was in management consulting. So I go back to my boss and my boss's boss. And one of the things that they always used to comment when I would come up with an idea or thought was, "You're thinking like an engineer, not like a consultant." And I think what they meant by that was I'm not thinking broadly enough. And what it conditioned me to do was not think necessarily about what's needed today, but what's needed 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And when implementing technology in an organization, certainly in large organizations, it's very, very hard to implement technology. And it's very, very hard to change platforms, like an on-prem platform with a cloud platform. So if you don't think in terms of those broad terms, there's a greater tendency to miss pieces and parts. You've got to think with a longer term vision to make sure you're incorporating all of those different aspects. And I probably go back to, those, my management consulting boss and his boss's boss, who have done great things in that respective firm. But that comment, which was pretty consistent in the early days, quit thinking like an engineer, think like a consultant. I think it still applies, and I still think about that to this day. And always tend to try to take a couple steps back in any technology program and say, what are we going to do? Not today to fix that particular problem, but how does it fit within the broader ecosystem? And that always generally carries with it a broader set of discussions and a much more robust and complete solution than if we had just tackled a single problem that had arisen.
Great secret. Think like a consultant, and by taking those steps back, hopefully solving some future problems, not just the one that's immediately in front of you. Good stuff. We do a Pass the Question here on the show where you get to put a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. But first of all, previous guest, Martin Coville, who's CISO at IPSL, has this question to ask of you.
Who, don't have to name the person, but who's been the most influential manager, either positive or negative, and what traits or skills did they have that have the most positive impact on you?
Yeah, again, so I mentioned, my time in management consulting. When I left management consulting and I went into one of the major OEM vendors, my boss, who had really positioned me to be a product manager and kind of lead cloud products and designs, she was really instrumental in terms of helping me articulate a vision of what it would take in order to accomplish this. I just talked about this broader range of things that you need to do. She was great in terms of communicating that story and building business cases and having the financials to kind of go with it. And understanding what it took, what are the foundational pieces and parts that you need to have in order to take that product idea to market. So I look back, on some of those early days after I left management consulting, which was very entrepreneurial, but it was very off the cuff. We went into products and ideas and services that there wasn't a well-defined methodology to do that. Mm-hmm. And my boss at EMC at the time, she was wonderful of creating this framework of these are all the things you need to think about. And they were very straightforward. And it was a regimented process that allowed me to take a lot of that consulting experience and then apply it to a structure and a framework that had been shown consistently within this very large organization, EMC, to deliver great and exceptional results. And when I married those two things together, it really did create exceptional results. We had a great run with the VirtuStream Healthcare Cloud, and obviously it's leveraging dividends here at Michigan Medicine. So can't thank those leaders enough.
Finally, Tim, what question would you like me to put to a guest on a future episode of CXO Secrets?
We talked a lot about technology and how to implement technology and change and culture. But one of the things that's always been super important for me and continues to resonate, probably the older I get within this, within technology, is what's the leadership quote, value, or mission statement that really affects how you lead people, projects, or initiatives. I I think that would be a fun question for someone to ask. But I think sometimes we don't think about the ethics or the culture or the people process of this, and we're so focused on the technology. So that, I think, would be a fun question for you to pose, and should be a fun question for someone to field.
I look forward to asking it. Thank you very much indeed for that. And well, thank you, Tim Calahan, for joining us here on CXO Secrets. It's been great to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much.